Roll call.
Senate roll call. Day 17, Thursday, February 2nd. Anderson? Here. Baldwin? Here. Barlow? Present. Beitman? Here. Boner? Here. Richard? Here. Brennan? Here. Case? Present. Cooper? Here. Dockstetter? Here. Ellis? Present. French? Here. Furphy? Here. Garoop? Here. Hicks? Here. Hutchings? Here. Ide? Here. Jones? Here. Kinski? Here. Cole? Present. Landon? Here. Larson? Here. McEwen? Here. Nethercott? Here. Pappas? Here. Rothfuss? Here. Salazar? Here. Schuler? Here. Scott? Here. Steinmetz? Here. President Driscoll?
Here.
31 present.
Thank you. Prayer by Reverend Mark Marston, First United Methodist.
Let us pray. Our Lord in heaven, we give you great thanks for all those who serve in uniform. May you truly bless and protect them. Our Lord, please also protect those who hold down the home front, those who serve at home, so that they may go and do their work overseas and on TDYs, temporary duty assignments. Our Lord, please bless these men and women on this day, that they might focus on what binds us and not what separates us. Help them to be bridge builders, connection makers, focusing on what they have in common. For these things we pray through Jesus Christ. Amen and amen.
Senator Boner, please lead us in the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Reading, correction, and approval of journal.
Mr. President, your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of February 1, 2023 has been read and recommends it to be approved. Senator Larson, Chairman.
Are there any objections? Being none, report is adopted. No doctor again today. Today in Wyoming history, Governor Leslie E. Miller signs the Child Labor Amendment ratifying it for Wyoming 1935. Growth and development of people is the highest calling of leadership. Your budget amendments are due by 5 o'clock today, and they've got to be numbered by 7 tomorrow morning. Tomorrow's the third reading of the budget bill, end of a long week. Thank you, guys. Friday is the last day for bills to be reported out of the committee in the House of Origin. So with that, we've got a lot of special people here. If you look up in the gallery and around and on the floor, fellow senators, we're honored to have Wyoming's General Major Greg Porter and Chief Master Sergeant Josh Moore, the Wyoming senior enlisted leader, with us today to recognize some outstanding soldiers, airmen, and civilian employees from the Wyoming Military Department. Members of the Wyoming National Guard proudly serve as our sword and shield. As the sword, our airmen and soldiers answer the nation's call and stand ready to be a lethal fighting force in the battle space. As a shield, they remain trained and ready to aid us here at home whenever and wherever they are needed. These guardsmen and civilian employees represent the best of the Wyoming Military Department. Please join me in recognizing the incredible service of these individuals. General Porter, I invite you to say a few remarks. Folks, we can't say enough about what the military does for us in Wyoming, for us individually, and us as a country. Please join me in welcoming all of them and General Porter.
Up we go, guys. There we go. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the Senate. For those of you who have not met, my name is Major General Greg Porter, and I serve as the 27th Adjutant General for the state of Wyoming. Brought a few of guests here today to witness to demonstrate, to give you an opportunity to meet some of them. First off, I want to thank you all for the opportunity. I know all of you are incredibly busy doing the work of the people, and appreciate just a moment in time here for me to give an opportunity to introduce some really cool human beings, both here on the floor and up in the stands there. First, though, if I could, I would like to just start with a couple of thanks and acknowledgements, if I could. First, I'd like to acknowledge Senator Bill Landon, Senate District 27, for his hard work and dedication serving as the chair for the Transportation and Military Affairs Committee. Sir, appreciate our time working together. We tackled some tough issues, and your leadership was particularly beneficial. So thank you, sir, for all you did. Hey, I'd like to recognize our new chair, Senator Brian Boner, Senate District 2. Senator Boner is no stranger to the committee. He's served on it before. He's a former Air Force officer and a dedicated senator and leader. Sir, looking very much forward to working with you and receiving your counsel as we tackle some pretty tough issues in the state and the nation. Thank you, sir, and welcome to the committee. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our Commander-in-Chief, Governor Mark Gordon, for his leadership and vision. It's been a volatile couple of years, to say the least, and Governor Gordon has led from the front with purpose, forethought, unmatched calm and common sense. His care for the soldiers and airmen that serve under him are very real. I wanted to thank him for his leadership. You know, I've told this body before that there's a lot of similarities between serving in the National Guard and what you do as senators and representatives. First, number one thing is this part-time job often becomes a full-time job pretty quickly. Secondly, nobody really calls you unless something bad's going on. And that's significant because you do this willingly. You stand up to serve the people of Wyoming and went out, did the work, and got elected to serve the people, our residents, our families. Most importantly, I think what you serve is our future, what the state is going to be. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate the work that you do. I wanted to take the majority of the time this morning introducing to you some great humans in the Wyoming Military Department. I had intended to bring some more members down with me so you can meet them as I kind of highlight their different experiences over this past year, but roads and some missions have kind of eaten into the folks that appeared with me today, so if you'd bear with me. First off, let me just introduce Tim Shepard. He's the director for the Veterans Commission. Tim and our Veterans Commission folks, members of them are up in the gallery there, do a great job helping with our vets. But there was one vet that we wanted, veteran service officer, that we wanted to very much recognize, and that was Mr. Brad Klein. Brad is a Cody High School graduate. He has dedicated the last 10 years to serving veterans of our state, helping them navigate the complex disability benefit system. He is an asset to the team, and he has made positive impact on many veterans' lives. Our veteran service officers assist our vets by bringing in over $72 million of the $238 million federal dollars provided in compensation and pension for the state of Wyoming. Brad couldn't be with us here today because he lives in Cody and couldn't make it down for the roads, but wanted to thank you, Brad, and congratulate him. Thanks, Tim, for all the work. Next is Miss Jessica Hulbert. Jessica, she is our Wyoming Military Department State Employee of the Year, so go ahead and stand up.
Right.
Jessica was born here in Cheyenne, but she was raised in Burns. She is our contract manager for the Construction and Facilities Management Office. In her first year as a contract manager, we saw unprecedented throughput of procurement actions and contracts. Thanks to her efforts, the Wyoming Military Department will execute 3 federal military construction projects simultaneously over the next 4 years. She did a great job. Jessica, thank you for your work. Hey, next I wanted to introduce our 2 non-commissioned officers of the year. First one, Sergeant Roybal, is our Air Non-Commissioned Officer of the Year. He's here with us today, but our Army Non-Commissioned Officer of the Year, Sergeant Holloway, couldn't make it down from Sheridan because of the roads. But let me tell you a little bit about Sergeant Roybal first, if I could. Sergeant Roybal was born here in Cheyenne and is a graduate of Central High School. He is a member of the 243rd Air Traffic Control Squadron and was the lead planner for a 3-day hub and spoke training event encompassing six joint service agencies, 121 air traffic controllers and maintenance personnel scattered across 6 locations here in Wyoming. He processed all air mission requests for all participants, enabling 6 airframes to support landing zone, drop zone, and assault landing maneuvers, resulting in over 1,041 aircraft operation. That is a record for the 243rd. For all his hard work, it's easy to see why Sergeant Roybal is the Wyoming Air National Guard Non-Commissioned Officer of the Year. Sergeant Tyler Holloway was born and raised in Sheridan as a graduate of Sheridan High School. And because of that, and the roads, he's not able to be here with us today, but he's done an outstanding job. He is the winner of the Wyoming Army National Guard NCO of the Year, but he is also the winner of the National Guard Best Warrior. That's right, he is the #1 non-commissioned officers out of over 100,000 NCOs in the National Guard.
Wow.
In total, Sergeant Holloway competed in 5 different competitions, first in the state, then in the region, and then nationally. Each one of those tested land navigation, marksmanship, physical fitness, and he went up against the best of the best. When he won the National Guard competition, he got the opportunity to then compete on the all guard team that competed against the entire Army as they did their business. That team made it into the top 4 of the entire Army. So great job to Sergeant Holloway and his groups. He's the best of the best. Hey, finally, I would like to recognize the 2022 Adjutant General's Ride for the Brand Awards winners. The Ride for the Brand Award is an annual award given to the units that exemplify what it means to ride for the Wyoming Army National Guard brand. Major Casey Henry, graduate of Cheyenne Central High, and First Sergeant Aaron Benson, graduate of Torrington High, couldn't be with us here today because, unfortunately, I sent them on a mission, and so they wouldn't make it. They're in the northern part of the state, actually making their way back down today. But between those two, they lead the 84th Civil Support Team. Over the last year, the Civil Support Team has dedicated countless hours to training proficiency in order to respond rapidly when a chemical, nuclear, or biological threat is present in our communities. Working with our partner nation of Tunisia, the Wyoming CST is the first, and so far the only, CST to deploy overseas and train our foreign partners. All of this work that they do makes them and exemplifies what they do to ride for the brand. So congratulations to them and the 84th CST. All of you have some great men and women that serve and live in the communities you represent. I am amazed every day at their talent, dedication, and most importantly, their humility. What they do in service to the state and nation, they do so of their own free will, fully knowing the burden that it places on their employers, and more importantly, their families. Yet they do it for service, not for themselves. And we need them. Truthfully, we need more of them. We have enemies. The United States is contested in the air, land, sea, cyber, and space every day. Somewhere in the world right now, there's a fight. We've got guardsmen deployed, about 38 of them, spread across Jordan, Syria, Kuwait, Afghanistan, every theater of operation you can think of, currently right now in that fight. And we're going to have more. More in the next months and more in the next years. We'll continue to do that. That's our job, is the sword. You've seen what Western aggression means to the people of Ukraine. I believe we know what would happen if that aggression is left unchecked. China is a whole different ballgame. They seek nothing less than to be the preeminent power in the world, a world where there is no place for democracy, freedom, and individual rights. Your work here in the legislature is the free exercise of our government in accordance with the will of the people expressed through you, their elected representatives. This is what makes our republic and the state of Wyoming special. It takes people like you willing to do the hard work, make the tough choices, prioritize things. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for your sacrifices that you make in order to make Wyoming the best place in the world to live. For myself and our brothers and sisters in uniform, Our job is to guarantee that you continue to do the work of the people. Thank you for all your support. Thanks to all the support here in Wyoming for the men and women that serve. It is unmatched anywhere I've been. Appreciate it. Ride for the brand.
Once again, we can't thank you enough for what you do. It does not go unnoticed or unappreciated. So we have another very special thing. Wyoming lost one of its dear friends, Major Theodore W. Gostis. The family's known throughout Wyoming as wonderful people and highly, highly respected. If Demetrius would come up, and we've got a proclamation, and also in attendance is his wife Jody and friends Marty Habrick, Terry Habrick, and Russ Tellander. I've got a proclamation I'd like to give Demetrius, and I'll read the proclamation while we're here. So kind of fitting with the Military Day and kind of a sad note. 67th Legislature of the State of Wyoming recognizes Major Theodore W. Gostis. A joint resolution of the undersigned members of the 67th Legislature of the State of Wyoming recognizing Major Theodore W. Gostis posthumously on Military Day 2023 for his patriotism, dedication, and sacrifice to the United States of America. Whereas Ted Gostis, born 1938, was commissioned a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army through the Army ROTC program at the University of Wyoming on July 28, 1961, and went on active duty beginning March 28, 1963. And whereas after attending infantry school, the U.S. Army Intelligence School for Counterinsurgency Training, and Foreign Language School, Captain Gostis served as a German interpreter with U.S. Army Europe in West Germany from April 64 to March 1967. And whereas Ted deployed to Southeast Asia, where he served as an intelligence officer with the 135th Military Intelligence Battalion of the 525th Military Intelligence Group in South Vietnam from April 1967 until he was captured and taken prisoner of war during the Tet Offensive on February 1, 1968. And whereas for 5 years, 1 month, and 15 days, Ted was a captive in North Vietnam, surviving only on 2 small rice balls and approximately 4 ounces of water a day. Ted was kept in a hole in the ground with 35 fellow prisoners in a space meant to house 9 people. Ted was tortured and abused, and by being struck in the head and stomach repeatedly with an AK-47, hung from a rope from extended periods of time, and denied water, all the while watching his fellow troops die. And whereas during 4.5 years of solitary confinement, Ted was beaten repeatedly. Ted was informed he was to be sentenced to death and forced to wear a cloth target on his chest. Ted's health deteriorated. The abuse Ted suffered led to abdominal damage, 18 abscessed teeth, and eventually affected his heart. And whereas Ted was finally released on March 16, 1973, during Operation Homecoming after spending 1,871 days in captivity, Ted was awarded the Bronze Star, 2 Purple Hearts, and the POW Medal. Ted endured years of therapy to help with the psychological suffering he endured. He made a full recovery and retired from the Army in December 1977. Ted began drawing and painting about his life as a POW and participating in speaking engagements to express to others what it meant to be a POW. And whereas Ted passed away on January 31, 2023 in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and while we will no longer be able to listen to him share his compelling story, we are heartened his story will forever live through his book, Prisoner, which brings to light the terrifying experience of POWs and the sacrifices they endured for our freedom. Now therefore be it resolved by the undersigned members of the 76th Legislature of the State of Wyoming that on behalf of the State of Wyoming, we hereby honor and pay tribute to the patriotism and bravery of Major Theodore W. Gostas. We are extremely appreciative of his service to our country. We commend his unique and unparalleled sacrifice and extend our condolences to his family at his recent passing. Signed on this second day of February, 2023. Folks, what an American Wyoming hero and a compelling experience. Unbelievable. So honored for all of us. And we thank you, your family, and him for those times were incredible times for the country. And those were truly our heroes. Unbelievable. Can't say enough. I have this for you. If you'd like to say a few words, you're welcome to. If not, you're welcome. I have this as well. Thank you.
Well, I talked to my dad last week when he was still alive, and he thought this was going to be an awesome honor. So he wanted to invite me to be here, and I said, I'm being here. Didn't no matter how the bad our Wyoming roads were going to be, I was going to make it. And because it was my dad, the roads were really bad. But we were able to get here. He is, if there was ever a warrior, he would be the one to be a warrior. I can't tell you all the things that he has survived, everything from cancers to Agent Orange to shrapnel coming out of his body to teeth problems. I mean, the list goes on and on. And to come back from that and to bring in, you know, recognize all the veterans, because he loved veterans and he wanted to work with them. And one of the things that I really liked about him was that he brought a positive attitude to his artwork. Some of it depicts the horrors of war, but then there's other artwork that doesn't. And he strived to work with other veterans, and I can't tell you the countless times that he's been around the United States to speak to not only veterans, but other people, other organizations on, you know, how important it is to support the veteran. And, you know, when I was younger and he came off you know, we were watching the plane in the Philippines, and we were watching for him to come off, and we said, I think that's Dad. It was just an amazing, amazing thing to see. But it came with, you know, some other things too. Is when he came to the United States, you know, everybody in Wyoming supported him. You know, we had tremendous support here in Wyoming, and that's one of the other reasons why I think he was so happy to come here and accept this award today. When I would go through airports and things like that, and I'd hear about the protesters at the time of the Vietnam War, you know, it just didn't seem, you know, I just couldn't believe, because, you know, I was holding up as a hero. But when these veterans initially came back, there wasn't that support that they are getting today. And one day I was going through the airport and I saw the khakis coming from Iran, and everybody was shaking their hands, giving them a seat, and it just made me very proud. So again, I just want to thank you for this honor. I know that he just absolutely loves it, and thanks for honoring him.
Thank you so much. Have a picture with everybody. Ellen, can you figure out somebody to get me a picture? Oh, we got it.
We're gonna open this all up.
They want to read that in the house, so if you can deliver it when you're over there. I definitely will. Huge thank you again, folks. We're really privileged. Senator Case,
Thank you, Mr. President. Privilege of the floor.
granted.
I love Military Day. It's my favorite. And I've heard Senator Landon talk about his dad. I'm thinking about that proclamation you just did, which is fabulous. Mr. President, thank you for that. We've got a couple guys in here that served in Vietnam. Senator Anderson here and our own Sergeant at Arms, Dick Morrison. Dick flew the last plane out of Saigon. Well, practically. It wasn't quite Saigon. Where's Dick?
Dick, come up here.
Make him come in here.
Come up here.
Mr. Morrison, calling you out.
Yeah.
So Dick Morrison here was pilot, C-130s in Vietnam.
Senator McEwen's a veteran as well.
Senator McEwen, thank you, sir. Thank you, Senator Anderson. These guys fought hard. My brother was shot in Vietnam, shot in the face, made it home. He died a few years back, but this is always a special day. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Senator Case. Senator Landon,
Mr. President, privilege of the floor.
granted.
Mr. President, it's been kind of a tradition for me, going on 16 years now. I too really get a swollen heart on Military Day, and I do like to look back on all the things I learned from my dad and reflect on where he was all those years ago. In the winter of 1945, he was a part of the 253rd, and today, all those years ago, they would have been dug in somewhere south of the Battle of the Bulge. It was some of the toughest fighting in World War II. I am lucky enough to have a manifest from the commander, and I've read through it. And every day, there were 5 or 6 last names that he listed as lost in action. Along with that, he would list, we lost Smith and Jones and Landon to wounded in action today. A little bit later on in this month was when my dad was hit and was flown back into France, where he was able to recover. A lot of those veterans didn't, Mr. President. The winter of 1945 was one of the toughest winters. If you look back in your historical weather review, you'll find that it was one of the toughest winters ever. And those guys literally crawled across France on their hands and knees. I'll never forget Dad telling us that he witnessed one of the first jet airplanes, looking back toward Mr. Morrison on that front, but he said that our anti-aircraft guns had no idea what they were looking at. That was the first jet ever, and of course the Germans beat us to it on that one. And that jet would come over them, and those anti-aircraft guns were shooting several hundred yards behind this airplane that was going so quickly. But in the meantime, all kinds of ordnance and shrapnel going overhead, and they were dug in, and a couple of mornings they would wake up with water up to their waists in those foxholes with the weather at about 20 to 25 degrees outside. They didn't have the clothing that we have today. So I just want to salute my dad and all those guys who did what they did. Thanks for giving me that opportunity, Mr. President.
Senator Landon.
Privilege of the floor, Mr. President.
And then
I'd like to have all the veterans in the Senate stand and let's recognize them. There's other veterans that
I was about to do that.
Cale did not recognize, so if all the veterans would stand, please. There you are.
Troy, you better stand up. appears it's probably the largest group we have in the Senate that's a contiguous group. Our military people, pretty neat. I'm going to do a little bit off the military, and Senator Landon may want to opine a little. Wyoming lost one of its incredible people that probably touched every person in this room and everything, which is Susie McMurray passed away. And the McMurray family left a touch on every corner of the state of Wyoming. And I'm not a good enough speaker to talk about it without shedding tears, because they were incredibly good to me. Both Mick and Susie were. And I don't know if Senator Landon wants to say a word or two, but it doesn't matter if you go to anything from football games at UW to all kinds of philanthropy programs across state. I don't think anybody could name them all, and that only counts the ones that people knew about. The hundreds that no one knew about are on top of that. Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you for that opportunity as well. You stated it very well, actually, and you know, the McMurrays, Mickey was the first one to say that he was lucky. Not so good, he was just very lucky. But you know what? We were lucky, because that family did so much with what they were able to accomplish over there on the Western Front. And Susie's passion extended to so many different things, but two of her favorites were the Boys and Girls Club in our neck of the woods, and also the CDCs, the Child Development Center. She led the way on that, and we were so fortunate to have her and her passion, and that has developed into such a special place. Very lucky to have the wife I do. She serves on one of the boards at that CDC, and those entities are certainly worth supporting, and remembering the effort of Susie McMurray, who's done so much for our kids in Wyoming. So many other things that they never took credit for, didn't want any credit for. And so thank you for recognizing her, Mr. President.
Senator Scott.
Mr. President, and she was special. One of the things she used to do personally, that I don't think is as widely known as it maybe might be, but she would go to the hospitals, volunteer, and go around and visit patients, particularly patients that were seriously ill, and try to help them, try to see if there's anything that she could do to help them. And I know when my wife was in her final illness up there, Susie came by, and Elaine really appreciated it. And that was something that she did personally, took her personal time. It wasn't a money thing or anything. It was a personal support. And someone, her station, that would spend a lot of her time doing that sort of thing is a very special example to everybody.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Anderson, and then Senator Landon.
Mr. President, Mick McMurray was also a Vietnam veteran, which he never said much about, but he was there the same time I was.
Thank you. Senator Landon, do you have something further?
Mr. President, just another quick privilege of the floor.
Yes, sir.
Please. You know, I heard a rumor that there might be a birthday today, and it belongs to the golden throat of the Senate. I think it's Randy's birthday. Happy birthday, Randy. Happy
Hey,
birthday.
Randy.
Happy.
We're going to sing to Randy. We don't have a Ray Peterson, so Eric Barlow, you're going to start. I know you've got a singing voice. You're going to do happy birthday. You're going to lead us. Well, you're leading. Your mic's on. Birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Randy. Happy birthday to you. Hey! Thanks, Senator Barlow. I
Thank
knew
you,
we
Mr.
could
President.
replace Ray Peterson, kind of. Senator, Majority Floor Leader Hicks,
Privilege of the floor, Mr. President.
granted.
You know, I've made it kind of a personal tradition on Military Day is to reflect. And there's one that I always come back to, and it comes back to our history. So I'd like to just share that with you, Mr. President, because I think it's very important to recognize this. So if you go back to the Revolutionary War, Washington and his troops were in New York and Long Island and promptly got defeated by the British, and the British were chasing them all the way across New Jersey, all the way back. And there was a gentleman with them was in their retreat, and they lost at Brandywine and the courthouse, and it was just one defeat after a defeat. And the British were emboldened, and we were in full retreat. But there was an individual that was with Washington's troop named Thomas Paine. And during the retreat, he wrote this article. And they called it The American Crisis #1. And in this article, he penned these words, and I'll share those with you. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and the thanks of man and woman. Tyranny like hell is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is the dreariness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price on its goods. And it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. Mr. Chairman, 10 days later, on Christmas Eve, what was left of a mere 2,800 colonial that had been soundly defeated were loading boats and crossing the Delaware River, and you've all seen it. And as they were loading the boats, George Washington had this read to the men as they were crossing. First victories that we accomplished in the war, and it literally saved the foundations of this country at that point in time. But I can't think of any more appropriate words than those that were penned at that time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. All right, back to business. Reports from standing committees. Birthday's over, Randy.
February 1, 2023. Mr. President, your committee number 9, Minerals, Business, and Economic Development, to whom was referred House Bill 50, Solid Waste Cease and Transfer Program Funding, respectfully report same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Cooper, Dockstader, Ellis, Jones, and Rothfuss. Senator Dockstader, Chairman. February 1, 2023, Mr. President, your committee number 9, Minerals, Business, and Economic Development, to whom was referred House Bill 61, engrossed. Source material associated with mining agreement. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Cooper, Dockstader, Ellis, Jones, and Rothfuss. Senator Dockstader, Chairman.
Thank you. Bills on second readings. Senator Dockstader, can you come forward? I've got to do an amendment. Can you? You want someone else?
Bills on second reading. Senate File 80. Read in.
Senate File 80, Visitation Rights, an act relating to public health and safety.
Are no amendments? Senate File 80, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, so ordered. Senate File 141.
Senate File 141, Transportation Technology Transfer Center Program Funding.
There is an amendment. Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, I move second reading Amendment 1 to Senate File 141. Mr. President, this just comes in and provides a footnote that says of those $300,000 of general fund appropriated to the program, that no funds designated for the Technology Transfer Center program under this section shall be used for administrative purposes. I just want to make that 100% of that general fund money is used for the purposes of the program, and that it's not skimmed off by either our agencies or our university for administrative purposes.
Questions, discussion on the amendment? Being none, all those in favor of second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 141, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The amendment is passed. We're back on the bill. No further discussion. Senate File 141 having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 174.
Senate File 174, Wyoming Charter School Authorizing Board.
There are amendments. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 174 and would ask the body to vote aye. Senators, this is an apology. I had included this in my notes with the initial batch of amendments we were hoping to get accomplished, but this one slipped through the cracks. This one would simply, on page 18, line 19, strike the words April 1st and insert 30 days. This is the time frame for which the authorizer has to review the application. Instead of making that an annual yearly process, the authorizer, now that we've got this new state authorizer set up, instead of being the SLIB, they would have 30 days to review that application. So I'd ask for your aye vote.
Discussions or questions? There being none, all those in favor of the second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 174, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The amendment is passed. There's another amendment. Senator Driscoll. Second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 174.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move second read amendment number 2 to Senate File 174. Folks, we're back in. This is, I told you yesterday, we got together with folks downstairs and with the person that kind of oversees the end of the schools. And we worked together with them to get this bill back to where it aligns a little closer with what some of the education people wanted to see and what some of the people downstairs. So part of it's cleanup, part of it's new. So the first part of it, I alluded to the authorizing board yesterday, Mr. Chairman. We had a 5-person board in there before. We've added 2 new positions into that board with this amendment. The first one being we're going to add 1 member that's appointed by the State Superintendent of Public Instruction and 1 member that's appointed by the Chairman of the State Board of Education. So we're kind of integrating in a little bit of the rank and file school system back into that state board. The next little bit of the amendment, line 10 through line 14, are just renumbered cleanup. And then on page 3, line 2, we do a little bit, and then we added confirmation by the Senate. So these positions before were not confirmed by the Senate. They will be confirmed by the Senate at this point. And then starting on line 18 on page 1 all the way through line 33, once again, it's cleanup and renumbering as you went through the deal because of what we've done up above. And then at the bottom of page 1 going into page 2, we've inserted some new language. we're worried about them, how it goes. So 21-308, hearing by authorized or prohibited actions by authorized, criteria of compliance, contractual authority. We went into existing language, we added the following to it. The performance of each teacher employed by a charter school should be evaluated one time per year against charter school standards for performance as submitted and approved pursuant to Wyoming Statutes 21-2-304, Roman B, XV. The evaluation shall be in writing, and an opportunity for feedback to improve performance shall be provided. The teacher shall receive a copy of each evaluation of his performance. That gets in, we're doing some stuff with teachers. They're a little different than teachers, and let's just make sure that they're falling within what they're supposed to be doing. On line 18, we took out the standing committee amendment that was in there, and on line 25, line 8, we did the same, and we deleted the superintendent of public instruction and inserted the Office of Administrative Hearings when it goes to the end of it. A little bit more cleanup on the thing. And then on page 25, line 21, and I've got to pull my bill out and track this in real quick. I apologize, I just barely got it handed to me when I was at the desk. On page 25, we struck less out on page 26, line 1, and added including, which is just a clarification of the language. Page 26, line 4, we struck out part of the statutes on that end of it, put them back in. And then we go back down, and at the bottom of page 2 is where we had discussion on this yesterday, we moved the funding from 80% to 100% on the amount that they're to be reimbursed on. And then going to page 3 of the amendment, goes into the major maintenance payments under the Wyoming statutes based upon the proportion that the charter school education building gross square footage contributes to the district educational building gross square footage. That gets where these buildings go on to major maintenance. On page 26, line 7, there was a statement, charter school shall be entitled to. We took that out, cleaned up a couple pieces of it, and then renumbered. With that, I'd stand for questions on this amendment. It's, all in all, it's a handful. The big guts of it is we added a couple members to the authorizing board. We moved the funding to 100% on that end of it, and the rest of it's the bill as you heard on the first reading. I would stand for questions and ask for your favorable consideration.
Questions, discussion on the amendment? Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, on the expansion of the authorizing board, I had thought maybe that it'd be a good idea if we removed the appointments by the presiding officers of the House and the Senate and kept it at 5 members. And I wonder if, was there any discussion, is that appointment by the legislative branch to an executive branch function that isn't invading the separation of powers, is it? That would be my concerns of what was going on there.
Thank you. Further discussions, questions before we go back to sponsor? Senator Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good Senator from Bates Creek, that would be an extremely friendly amendment. It was something that I had brought up in discussions. Did not actually get it passed through the bunch we dealt with easily. I can tell you for myself, for folks in the body, as President of the Senate, I would be uncomfortable appointing something, and particularly somebody that goes through Senate confirmation that I'm going to sit on. I'd be very comfortable with those 2 positions taken out and amended back to 5. That would be a very friendly third reading amendment. So with that, I thank you. Call for question.
Okay. Ready for the question? Question being called, a second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 174. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Back on the bill, further comment on the bill, Senate File 174. Senate File 174 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objections, it is so ordered. Bills on third reading.
My phone didn't ring during the search. Do you hear my text? Dang.
Bills on third reading and final passage. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, do you have a consent list?
Mr. President, we do have a consent list, and I move third reading consent list, which is follows. Senate File 43, EMS districts. Senate File 101, Wyoming Legal Tender Act amendments. Senate File 120, Restoration of Civil Rights. Senate File 127, Wyoming Stable Token Act. Senate File 129, Background Checks Governor's Office. Senate File 132, Study of K through 12 Education Program. Senate File 139, Unlawful Use of Charge Card or Debit Card. Senate File 143, Wyoming Freedom Scholarship Act 2. Senate File 152, Occupational Therapists Criminal History. Senate File 154, Energy Authority Project Financing Refineries. Senate File 155, Education, Teacher Resources. Senate File 167, Domestic Violence Protection Hearings, Remote Appearance. Senate File 169, State Shooting Complex Task Force. Senate File 173, Financial Institutions, similar names, and Senate File 176, Solid Waste Disposal Districts Consolidation.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor. Would anyone like any of these removed from the consent list? Senator Case.
Senate File 101. 101, Mr. Chairman, Wyoming Legal Tender Act amendments.
Thank you. That objection is removed. Anyone else? Thank you. Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? Senate File 43, EMS districts. Senate File 120, Restoration of Civil Rights. Senate File 127, Wyoming Stable Token Act. Senate File 129, Background Checks, Governor's Office. Senate File 132, Study of K-12 Education Program. Senate File 139, Unlawful Use of a Charge or Debit Card. Senate File 143, Wyoming Freedom Scholarship Act 2. Senate File 152, Occupational Therapist Criminal History. Senate File 154, Energy Authority Project Financing Refineries. Senate File 155, Education, Teacher Resources. Senate File 167, Domestic Violence Protection Hearings, Remote Appearance. Senate File 169, State Shooting Complex Task Force. Senate File 173, Financial Institutions, Similar Names. Senate File 176, Solid Waste Disposal Districts, Consolidation. Chief Clerk will call the roll.
On the consent list, Anderson. Baldwin. Barlow. Beitman. Boner. Bouchard. Brennan. Case. Cooper. Dockstetter. Ellis. French. Murphy. Guru. Hicks. Hutchings. Ide. Jones. Kinsky. Kolb. Landon. Larson. McEwen. Nethercott. Pappas. Rothfuss. Salazar. Schuler. Scott. Steinmetz. President Driscoll.
Aye.
On the consent list, 31 aye. Senate File 43, are there any changes? Larson? Aye to no. Bouchard, aye to no. McEwen? Aye to no. French? Aye to no. Beitman? Aye to no. Ide? Aye to no. Kolb? Aye to no. Salazar? Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 43, 23 aye, 8 no. Senate File 120, are there any changes? Scott?
Scott,
No. Kolb? Aye to no. Steinmetz? Aye to no. Jones? Aye to no. Dockstetter? No. Brennan? No. Aye to no. Hutchings? Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 120, 24 aye, 7 no. Senate File 127, are there any changes? Hicks? Aye to no. Bouchard? Aye to no. Kinski? Aye to no. Ide? Aye to no. Kolb? Aye to no. McEwen? Aye to no. Hutchings? Aye to no. Steinmetz? Aye to no. Salazar? Aye to no. Larson? Aye to no. Dockstetter, no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 127, 20 aye, 11 no. Senate File 129, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 129, 31 aye. Senate File 132, are there any changes? Bouchard? Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 132, 30 aye, 1 no. Senate File 139, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 139, 31 aye. Senate File 143, are there any changes? Barlow? Aye to no. Rothfuss? Aye to no. Aye to no. Anderson? Aye to no. Excuse me. Guru? Guru, aye to no. Jones? Aye to no. Kolb? Aye to no. Schuler? Aye to no. Excuse me. Nethercott? Aye to no. Pappas? Aye to no. Landon? No. Case?
Aye to no.
Aye to no. Cooper? Aye to no.
Driscoll, I don't know.
Driscoll, aye to no. And Furphy, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 143, 17 aye, 14 no. Senate File 152, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 152, 31 aye. Senate File 154, are there any changes?
Case, I to know.
Case, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 154, 30 aye, 1 no. Senate File 155, are there any changes? Rothfuss? Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 155, 30 aye, 1 no. Senate File 167, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 167, 31 aye. Senate File 169, are there any changes?
Case, I to know.
Case, aye to no. Scott? No. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 169, 29 aye, 2 no. Senate File 173, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 173, 31 aye. And Senate File 176, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 176, 31 aye.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elected to the Senate, Senate File 43, EMS districts, Senate File 120, Restoration of Civil Rights, Senate File 127, Wyoming Stable Token Act, Senate File 129, Background Checks, Governor's Office, Senate File 132, Study of K-12 Education Program, Senate File 139, Unlawful Use of a Charge or Debit Card, Senate File 143, Wyoming Freedom Scholarship Act 2, Senate File 152, Occupational Therapist Criminal History, Senate File 154, Energy Authority Project Financing, Refineries, Senate File 155, Education, Teacher Resources, Senate File 167, Domestic Violence Protection Hearings, Remote Appearance, Senate File 169, State Shooting Complex Task Force, Senate File 173, Financial Institutions, similar names, and Senate File 176, Solid Waste Disposal Districts Consolidation, have passed the Senate. Bills on third reading. Senate File 101, third reading of the bill.
Senate File 101, Wyoming Legal Tender Act amendments, sponsored by Senator Ide, an act relating to the Wyoming Legal Tender Act.
Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd like us to think about this a little bit, Mr. President. You know, the Boy Scout motto was always be prepared. And I think this is a bill about preparation. And it's a bill that's thinking about preparing for a time when our currency might be worthless. Perhaps our government is in chaos. Perhaps anarchy reigns in our capital city. And yet we want to, as this bill was originally written, to be able to force the state of Wyoming to take specie, gold and silver, for payment of taxes. That's really not an easy thing to do. It says that the fiscal impact is indeterminate, Mr. Chairman, and the bill has been amended to be the product of mind severance. But I think this is really about preparing Wyoming for the future, the chaos, when democracy melts down and our currency is worthless. But there's problems with it, Mr. President. One of them has to do with just thinking about gold. Everybody likes to think that gold is so great. Gold is a store of value. It holds its value relatively well. I concede that. But it's a very volatile value, Mr. President. And it's, in ancient times, you'd carry your gold around and you were very vulnerable. Someone could steal your gold. It was heavy. They had to keep track of it. You had your little piece of that football field of gold. And so we developed a banking system that lets you travel to a city and have the funds with you that you could write on, or you could withdraw funds there. Modern banking system is a wonderful thing. Doesn't mean it's always right. It doesn't mean governments can't mess it up. Certainly inflation. We've heard about inflation. We have inflation now in the United States for the first time in a significant amount in many years. We have a strong currency. We're spending too much, but our currency is the envy of the world. Trouble with gold is if you have it in an expectation that it's going to increase in value. So you're not going to trade it for something that you think is going to go down in value, like a dollar denomination. And if you have an entity like the state of Wyoming that has to take payment in dollars, we don't have a choice around that. Why would you give it up your gold, which you expect to increase, to pay a debt in dollars, which they have to take? You'd rather keep your gold, Mr. President. Trouble is, to force it on someone is expensive. I walked through the corridor this morning. I saw those safes downstairs. I'm thinking about filling those things up with gold again and locking those doors, those shiny doors that are all painted. And it's kind of a cool thought, but it's not easy. It's not fungible. You have to deal with dealers, and they take discounts. And it's just an enormously difficult thing. And despite what you think, gold doesn't always hold its value. It is a volatile commodity, like every other commodity. It has some apparent value in our mind because it's so magical. It was created in supernova explosions billions of years ago, as matter is converted into heavier elements. Couldn't even happen in our own sun. Our own sun has to stop at Harvard. But other stars, if they're heavy enough and big enough, and there's these massive things, they can go farther. They can get to gold, uranium. Pretty cool stuff. Billions of years old. But what are we prepping for? We're prepping for the chaos of democratic failure, where people take over the government and we fall apart. We have to rely, we'll have our guns and we'll hide in our basements and we'll keep track of our gold because that's the way we're going to eat, I guess. This is a very expensive proposition. It'd be very difficult to implement. And I believe this country is going to make it. I'm going to be there.
Thank you. Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and against this bill, from the get-go, I just thought it was not a workable solution. Number one, unless we decide to hold gold, it doesn't do us any good. And we don't. When people pay their taxes, what do we do with it? We redistribute it to our counties and cities. We pay for healthcare. We pay for our schools. We pay for all sorts of things. Yes, we do invest as well. We put it in the permanent mineral fund trust. We put it in whatever trust funds we have. And we do save. We put it in the LISRA account as well. The problem is if we're going to take gold, then our intent should be to hold it. We actually been investing our monies. Certainly, some people can say gold is an investment. I tend to believe what my colleague back in the corner mentioned, that that investment is very, very, very volatile. I think much more so than the investments that we're doing right now. And I don't think it's the intent of our treasurer or the policy of the state to invest in gold and to hold gold. Yes, we could hold gold. We wouldn't hold it in our state. We would hold it in some depository somewhere in New York, in Idaho, or wherever they have depositories. And in chaos, if indeed we're holding it because someday the dollar will go away and we'll be in chaos, I'm not so sure that we'll be able to get to our gold. So anyhow, I just see it as an unworkable policy. Don't think that anyone will be, any of the severance taxes will be paid in gold. And so I think it's going to be a lot of work to prepare to take it for an eventuality, in my mind, that will never happen. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I stand in support of this bill. You know, there may come a time when this bill will help beyond what we all know. And I think all of you remember how close we were in 2008 to financial crisis. Time makes us forget those crises. I'm one of those individuals who happen to believe that this very well could happen again, particularly when we see in Washington what's being spent. So I would ask the body to look very closely at this bill. I think it is needed, and I think it deserves our consideration, and I intend to vote for it.
Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and for the bill. I don't know a lot about gold and investments and the like, but I don't believe we, the legislature, will be dealing with the gold and how it'll be handled, how it'll be stored. It'll be our treasurer, and it appears that he seems to want to join in on this. So I think we should pass the bill and let him deal with the details of the matter. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, we as legislature have worked with the state treasurer to develop an investment fund committee. These are professionals who have invested funds for many years, and we are relying on them to make the right investments for our state. And quite honestly, Mr. President, when I review what they've invested in, not one time have they invested in gold. So to me, what would happen is if we accept those payments in gold, the state treasurer, to meet the investment fund committee's objectives, would have to immediately sell that gold and convert it to dollars. So, Mr. President, I don't think this bill makes sense. I think we should continue to rely on our experts and our state treasurers. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. President, on and for the bill, but let me give you a reason why. And my colleague from Fremont County talked about the dirt, the dark, and, you know, the looming world collapse. So, Mr. Chairman, from 1870 to 1820s, gold was the currency that was recognized around every world. All the countries printed their currency, and it was the gold standard, and it was an international gold standard. And then we talk about the volatility of gold, and then the 1930s come along and the federal government abolished the ability of private citizens to own gold. And you know why, Mr. President? Because the US currency collapsed. The Great Depression. And so we confiscated, we actually made it illegal to own gold in this country because we were afraid, because the US dollar wasn't worth anything, right? So that went on, and then we got to 1971. And still the gold standard was on the books, Mr. Chairman, but we had a presidential order because the dollar was pegged to the value of gold, even though they confiscated it, made it illegal to own it. We were still on the gold standard technically. And the reason that the president at the time got rid of the gold standard is because it was pegged to gold, the value of gold. And we could not print money and spend money because it was pegged to the value of gold. So the only way for the United States government to be able to start printing money, because we didn't own enough gold at the time, even though, Mr. President, today, the #1 holder of gold in the world, United States of America, 8.1 tons of gold in the US government treasuries vaults. Mr. Chairman, it's been a long recognized standard. It's probably less volatile than the dollar over a long period of time. It's a recognized, like you can go anywhere in the world and transact, whether it's a gold Krugerrand, a Philharmonic, a Maple Leaf, Australian dollars. We still have around the world currencies that are printed. Our US government prints gold currency today. You can buy from the US Mint, Mr. President. So who owns the most gold? The United States government. Why don't we just get rid of it? It's not worth anything. Who owns the next most gold? The European Union, the bloc countries. Who's buying the most gold? China, Russia. Why? Because always when governments collapse, they revolt back to gold and silver. As a long standard, Mr. Chairman, I don't think we're going to see people overwhelming the Treasurer's office for the very reasons that my friends said. It's because most people are going to hold it because of the US dollar is more likely to collapse than the value of gold. It's just recognized as a long-standing tradition to be able to do transactions with gold and silver. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Ride.
Thank you, Mr. President. Glad we had to have this discussion, or glad we got to have this discussion today. You know, the intent of this bill is, for the most part, to give the treasurer another asset class to invest in, give him specific authority. There's not a whole lot of downside in protecting against inflation with gold. You know, the dollar, since the Federal Reserve came into existence in 1913, the dollar's lost, anybody, you know, you see a lot of different numbers, 96 to 98% of its value. And as the story I gave you earlier in general file was, you know, if you had a 1 ounce coin, you could buy a good suit. It was worth $20 back 100 years ago. And today you can still buy that. Over time, gold retains its value. And this is an insurance policy for a lot of money that we're responsible for here. I mean, I know over the past few years, we've had, you know, investments in third world debt, emerging market debt that we've been crushed on. We've been crushed on bonds this year. There's no counterparty risk with gold. Gold isn't a debt to somebody else. Everything else, all of this paper fiat currency is. And all this is intended to do is give us, the treasurer, another tool in the toolbox to defend ourselves against inflation, which is ravaging the world right now. And, you know, gold's been money for 5,000 years. It's the money that people, the free market money that they decide to use. It wasn't picked by government. It was picked by the free market deciding what's the best money to use and in, you know, doing transactions. And I think that a lot of the fears here, I mean, there's a Grisham's law that says that bad money drives out good, and those comments were made today. I don't think people are really going to make their payments in gold. It's you know, it's only for mineral taxes, and you know, as far as the requirement, I mean, the treasurer could effectively own one ounce coin, and he would be in compliance basically with. So it's not like we're forcing him to buy a certain amount of gold. It just gives them another tool to hedge against what's going on right now, and it could get worse. So with that, the good senator from Baggs gave an eloquent description of why we use gold. And you know, there was those dates that he gave you, 1870, I had a few little different ones, but I've looked at it too. About the end of 1920, there was literally no inflation when we were on the gold standard. It was just a flat line. Your money for that 50-year period of time would effectively buy you the same basket of goods 70 years later or 50 years later. So that's all I'm trying to do here. It doesn't look like there's any expense to the state on this. It just allows the treasurer to get the plumbing in place to be prepared, as the comments were made. So with that, I'll rest here, and thank you, Mr. President.
Seeing no further debate. So, having been read three separate times, the question is, shall Senate File 101 pass the Senate? Senate File 101, Wyoming Legal Tender Act Amendments. Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Senate File 101, third reading roll call. Anderson? No. Baldwin? No. Barlow? No. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brannan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? No. Ellis? No. French? Aye. Murphy? No. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? No. Kinski? Aye. Cole? No. Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? No. Pappas? No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? No. Scott? No. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Dockstetter, no to aye. Rothfuss, no to aye. Closing vote. Closing vote closed. Senate File 101, 16 aye, 15 no.
One more, 1650? 1650, you said?
Yes, sir. 16 aye, 15 no.
Senate File 101, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elected to the Senate, Senate File 101, Wyoming Legal Tender Act Amendments, has passed the Senate. Congratulations, Senator Ide. First one out. Senate File 111, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 111, Child Abuse Change of Sex, sponsored by Senator Scott, an act relating to crimes and offenses.
There is an amendment. Can we have the amendment read in, please?
Senate File 111, third reading amendment number 1, page 1, line 2, after.
Senator Kinski.
Mr. President, I wish to withdraw the amendment.
Without objection, so ordered. Any discussion? Question being called. Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm rising again to speak against this bill, Mr. President. I'm told that raising your children is a fundamental right. That it's one of the highest rights that we have. I'm told there's court cases that have made it a little bit less clear, but it's one of the highest standards. And to overturn, to stick the state in between a parent and a child, you have to prove overwhelming harm. And I think it's, the lawyers will jump all over me, but it's like clear and convincing. I think we all see that this practice could cause harm, but it's really not clear and convincing to me in each and every case. As parents struggle with this, and children struggle with this, and the medical community learns to do more, does it really? And there will be mistakes no matter how we cut this. If this passes and it goes into place, or if it doesn't pass, there will be mistakes. But is there a clear and convincing reason for the state to say that parents and children and medical professions can't be in this space, Mr. President? It's a difficult one. I know it's difficult for you, but I think we're being reactionary here. This actually doesn't happen in Wyoming to any great extent, and we're being fearful. And I think we should remember fundamental rights of a family, and we're deciding that we're better than that. And so often, we hear the opposite. The state shouldn't get in the way of a family when it comes to education or whatever. But here we're going to get in the way of them. Mr. President, I can't go here, so I'm a no vote.
Thank you. Senator Scott.
Mr. President, on and for the bill. Mr. President, this is a serious matter. And as I said in Committee of the Whole, introducing this bill, you should vote for it only if you think the evil that we're preventing is serious enough that we ought to make doing it a criminal offense. And Mr. President, I will represent to you that it is. That, as in the other forms of child abuse, it's bad enough so that we should not allow it, regardless of whether the child wants it, and the parents either push it or agree. This is a very profound change in the life that child will lead. Sex change would prevent them from ever having their own child. Would lead to serious mutilation of the very intimate parts. And it is irreversible. And it's being pitched to our kids, and I have heard of instances of being pitched here in Wyoming at a time when they do not understand, because they have not lived long enough, because they have not matured enough. They do not understand the consequences. And it's irreversible. So for those reasons, I think it is something that we ought to make a crime, and I urge you to vote for the bill.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on and against the bill. I think the characterization and the debate really focuses on the challenge here in describing this practice as evil. evil, a value judgment, coming down to core beliefs. And we understand that there are a diversity of beliefs regarding gender identity and transgender issues. And this is something that comes to the Wyoming legislature, it comes to our discussions back home, Mr. President. It comes to our families, our communities, our churches, our schools. It's very much in the public eye right now. And this is one of those bills that really takes a strong side and says, we're going to label someone's interest and desire to affirm a gender identity that's different from their genetic sexual identity as child abuse, as evil. And this is really, Mr. President, in my view at least, and I realize I certainly represent many that share the same view, but I understand that it's not everyone's view. But this is the heart of the problem. This is the reason why the transgender community feels isolated and feels as if they're being targeted and has a suicide ideation rate which is well above the general public. Because legislation like this says it's a crime to have the desires that you have. Now, once you become 18, it's not child abuse anymore, but that's because you're not a child. Really, definitionally, that's what this legislation is saying, is that any action, and it's not just a full surgical change of sex that is in this legislation, it's the use of any drug or any agent that moves in this direction, much broader than the idea of surgical transition in youth. And the talking point is imagining somebody that's very young and might have uncertainties when the reality is, first of all, that these surgeries don't happen in the state of Wyoming and that medical professionals are engaged and they talk through transitions and they really think this through in consultation with parents, medical provider, and of course, very importantly, Mr. President, the individual that has a different gender identity, that is looking for solutions to affirm their gender identity. So, Mr. President, the idea that the state of Wyoming, through the legislature, will step in and say, we have different views, we have sort of old school views, traditional views, and we're going to step in and say that your views are tantamount to child abuse and evil. Goes well beyond our role. It is, Mr. President, up to the parent. It is up to the individual. It is up to their consultations with healthcare providers. It shouldn't be up to the Wyoming legislature, 31 folks here, voting on behalf of the interests of individuals that we don't understand, we haven't talked to, and I can assure you, the community that's most affected has not weighed in favor of this legislation. They're kind of horrified by it because, once again, it's an attack on their beliefs, their way of life, and their lifestyle, which Article 1, Section 2 of our Constitution makes pretty clear should be up to that individual. This is more big government, big government, telling people what to believe and what to do with their sexuality, their individual nature, and things that should be between parents and children and healthcare providers. Thank you, Mr. President. On and against the bill.
Larson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm on the bill and for it. We passed a similar bill 3 years ago. It was prohibition of female genital mutilation. Overwhelmingly. This is, you need to be 18 before you can decide this for yourself. When you're that young, you just don't understand your body and such. But in that bill, we said the parents couldn't do this. Nobody could do it to their child. The doctors and that. So for the bill, let's get it passed.
McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm listening to some of the debate on this. We're getting the government involved with parents raising children. Last time I checked, a parent will get in trouble for giving their kid alcohol. A parent will get in trouble for letting their kid drive a car on the roads. I'm not sure this is about picking on one community, but I am positive this is a permanent change. And if we're going to define the difference between a child and an adult, which we do at age 18, we need to back that up with the decisions we make that they can't make until they're adults. We don't let people drink till they're 21. But now, theoretically, you can get a sex change at age 10. It seems uneven, and I honestly don't feel like we're picking on the LGBTQ community or anybody's lifestyles. I think we're trying to look out for the best interest of children. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Drew.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I don't think it's true that if I give my child a glass of wine at dinner, that it's illegal. That if I let my child, like my dad did to me, let me drive the pickup truck every now and again when I was young, that too is illegal out on the ranch. But what we're doing today is we are taking away parental rights. Now, we may not like what this is all about. We may not understand it. I don't, to be a great extent. I really don't. But I have I sit in this room and I listen to great speeches by all of you talking about freedom, rights, the right to own a gun, the right to do as we please, the Western rights, the code of the West. You know, when we call the roll call, when the chief clerk calls a roll, a few names before mine, I sit back in my chair and I look up. I look up to the ceiling at the stained glass and our great state seal. Equal rights, it says. I hope you all take a look at that because we're going to take a vote in a minute and we're going to say, not today. Thank you.
Comments? Question? Oh, excuse me. Senator Bouchard, I'm not paying attention, throw rocks.
Thank you, Mr. President. Look, I'm not going to change some of the minds here, but if you're on the fence, keep this bill rolling because you're going to see testimony. You're going to see more stuff coming on this. The young women that were abused by the system, they weren't ready to make a decision to have their breasts sliced off. Why would we think they can make a decision like that at such a young age? A permanent decision. We should be defending our daughters and our children from making such decisions. That's what this is about. We're not saying they can't do it when they become an adult. You're going to hear from people who are going to tell you how the system told their parents, you better do this or they're going to commit suicide. Put pressure on those parents to make these decisions. when these decisions are made, you can't reverse them. These things, I mean, we're talking about changing somebody's body to where those pieces are gone. The chemical mutilation alone of what it does to the organs can be irreversible. Maybe not if they stop it quick enough, but if this goes on, it causes damage. The amount of damage to a uterus from the wrong hormones is incredible. I urge the body to read about the damage that happens and read about some of these young girls who are coming out. Some of them are on national tours talking about this stuff. We're going to have some of them here tomorrow. I urge you to keep this bill moving, get all the information on and for the bill.
Other comment? Seeing none. Question being called. Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall Senate File 111 pass the Senate? Senate File 111, child abuse, change of sex. The Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 111. Anderson? No. Baldwin? No. Barlow? No. Whitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? No. French? Aye. Furphy? No. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kinsky? Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll?
Aye.
Aye. Cooper, no to aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 111, 22 aye, 9 no.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 111, child abuse, change of sex, has passed the Senate.
Stupid.
5-minute recess. Stand east, sound of the gavel. Randy, do we have stuff? Reports from standing committees.
February 2, 2023. Mr. President, your committee number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom was referred Senate Joint Resolution 11, Convention of States, respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Barlow, Boner, and Case. No, Senators Landon and Scott. Senator Case, Chairman. February 2, 2023, Mr. President, your committee number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom was referred Senate File 140, Building Code Requirements, Refrigerants, respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Barlow, Boner, Case, Landon, and Scott. Senator Case, Chairman. February 2, 2023, Mr. President, your committee number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources, to whom was referred House Bill 104 engrossed, Hunting of Predatory Animals Amendments. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Ellis, Jones, and Schuler. No, Senator Garou. Senator Schuler, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. President, I move the Senate stand recessed until 2 p.m.
Thank you. Are there any announcements? Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I just remind the committee, we're going to take up Senate File, I believe it's 142, carbon sequestration at 12:30. And then we'll have continuing of I-80 tolling upon adjournment.
Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 3, Revenue, will meet, let's say, at 12:15 to take up the following 2 bills in W6. Senate File 171, Wyoming Second Amendment Financial Privacy Act, and Senate File 135, Repeal Gun-Free Zones, Government Buildings and Meetings.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, will meet at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning in room 6 and online to hear Senate File 144, Chloe's Law, Children, Gender Change Prohibition, and Senate File 0162, Grace Smith Medical Freedom Act.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee 1 Judiciary is back on for tomorrow morning. Originally, we were not sure about starting time on Friday here in the chamber, so we had scheduled these and then put them on hold, but tomorrow morning at 7:30, the Judiciary Committee will meet to take up the following bills. House Bill 97 engrossed, Chancery Court Jurisdiction Amendments. House Bill 111 engrossed, Endangering Children Fentanyl. House Bill 112 engrossed, Theft Penalty for 5th or subsequent offense as time permits. Again, that's at 7:30 in the morning, Judiciary Committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee 9, Minerals, will be meeting Friday at 12 noon to hear House Bill 69, engrossed coal-fired facility closures litigation funding amendments. Thank you.
Chairman Ginsky.
Mr. Chairman, I'm hoping for a 5-minute stand-up meeting with my Senate Appropriations Committee in 311, just a debrief from yesterday at 1/4 If that's a conflict for any of my members, just let me know, but 1/4 in 311. Thank you.
Majority Floor Leader Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. President, your committee number 5, Agriculture, State Public Lands, Water Resources, and Firearms Committee, will be meeting upon adjournment today to take up Senate File 148, Preemption of Local Firearm Regulations, Senate File 149, Enhanced Concealed Carry Permit for Improved Reciprocity, and Senate File 150, Capital Carry, Mr. President.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader, can you tell us what we're doing tomorrow? You and I had talked, and are you prepared?
Mr. President, that was the privilege of the floor.
Okay.
So what we're going to try to do to get done, folks, today is get as many of these Senate files processed today as we can. There'll be some coming out of committee. What I'd like to do tomorrow, we're going to do a second and third reading. We are going to do some committee of the whole, so we don't get bogged down on Monday with 20 or 30 Senate. I think there's roughly about 30 Senate files out there, Mr. President. So the plan is right now is to come back in at 9:30 in the morning to do second and third readings, and we will work committee of the whole. At this point in time, just depending on how fast it goes, Mr. President, I don't know what time we get out of here. If we can get through today about 10 bills and maybe 5 or 6 tomorrow, we might be able to get out of here by 2 o'clock at the earliest, but we need to get these things processed and going. So that's kind of the plan, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr.
So it'll be
Chair.
9:30 tomorrow that we'll start in here. Any other questions, Mr. President?
No, sir.
All right, thank you.
Sounds good. I just wanted to clarify it so the body knew what we were up to. You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Senate stand recessed till 2 p.m.
What if